I am the only person who's calling for complete and total disclosure of every piece of evidence relevant to Jeffrey Epstein. They're withholding evidence that shows that many of the women who made accusations made them falsely. But who are the victims? In my case, I was the victim. I was the victim of a false accusation. They're not protecting the victims. They're protecting accusers who may be victims or may be victimizers. That's what the legacy of the Me Too movement has been. A nation of protesters. We started our country by protesting. The people who signed the Declaration of Independence were subject to the death penalty.
But after January 6th, after what we saw with the abortion clinic protesters, we now see that the conservative side is also crying for criminal justice reform because they can come after you, and there is so much prosecutorial misconduct.
I agree that pardon is a very important part of our system of checks and balances. I had the privilege of advising President Trump in his last term. At 8 o'clock at night, hey, Alan, it's Donald. You're tempted to say, Donald who? We don't want to live in a society where crimes are committed because the government commits the crimes. By showing often a reluctant American public that sees things in black and white, that there are gray areas here. Entrapment has been a common tool used by the government in many cases. You can entrap anybody. You can fool them into it. You can lie to them. You can destroy an ideology if you destroy the leaders of the ideology. That's why Israel has to be given the green light to destroy Hamas.
Alan, good to see you, my friend.
Likewise, see you a free man, not presumed innocent, but declared innocent.
Yeah, it's with the case being dismissed, it's nice to get that off your shoulders, and there is no sweeter taste of freedom than from a man that has been deprived it. So, and I appreciate all your help in that matter. It was an ugly fight, and sometimes you win ugly, but it's still winning.
It's winning, and you won not only for yourself, but for all Americans who exercise the right of assembly, of free speech, and protest. You know that you and I disagree politically about things, but I admire your willingness to stand up for your principles, and I condemn the government for having gone after you for standing up for your principles. And so I'm glad it resolved itself in the way it did, not only for your sake, but for the sake of all Americans who will protest in the future. We are a nation of protesters. We started our country by protesting. The people who signed the Declaration of Independence were subject to the death penalty. As Benjamin Franklin said, we will either hang together or we will hang separately. They were guilty of treason in the eyes of the British authorities. And protests have been part of our history from the beginning of time. I myself have participated in them over the years, starting when I was about 15 or 16 years old, when I went down to Washington, D.C. to visit, just to see Washington. And the day I was there, Ibn Saud, the king of Saudi Arabia, was being honored by the White House, and there were Saudi flags flying on the Lincoln Monument. And I couldn't bear the idea that a slaveholder's flag would be on the Lincoln Monument. So I went up and I tore it down, and I got arrested. And that was my first encounter with the law. But fortunately, the park policeman said that next time I should make sure if I do it, nobody is looking. He clearly supported what I'm doing, and it didn't go on my record. But that's the important part of American history.
That's great. There was probably a different approach to criminal justice at that time. And it's unfortunate that if you stand up, which is quite necessary for our free and open society, if you stand up against tyranny, or you stand up against the administration, that you can be put in a situation where you're prosecuted to the degree that some have recently. And so we have a lot to talk about today.
One other thing, you're not the only one who is victimized for taking the position you took. The 65 Project, a group of hard left, radical, anti-American lawyers, many of them very prominent, started an organization to go after any lawyer who defended Donald Trump. And they filed bar charges against lawyers, and including me. And I've had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to fight frivolous bar charges, which they brought against me only because I defended Donald Trump against an unconstitutional impeachment. So we're seeing this all over. And it's wrong when it's done by the right. It's wrong when it's done by the left. It's just variations of old-fashioned McCarthyism.
And those are some of the topics I wanted to talk to you about. We got a lot to discuss: judicial reform, criminal justice reform. I read the new book. You came in hot on this one, Alan. I've read a lot of your books, and this one is extremely compelling, and I think it is very necessary to the public conversation that is occurring right now on the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about some of the headwinds that the FBI and the DOJ and the administration have in front of them. Let's start with the justice system. You once said that the justice system is like a blind date. Lots of promises, awkward moments, and you're hoping just hoping the verdict doesn't leave you crying in the parking lot. And I think a lot of people on the conservative side have now common ground with people that have long been on the liberal side crying for criminal justice reform. I grew up in a privileged way that I never had any encounters with the justice system. And a lot of conservatives can say the same thing. But after January 6th, after what we saw with the abortion clinic protesters and the many people that were prosecuted under the Biden DOJ, we now see that the conservative side is also crying for criminal justice reform because they can come after you, and there is so much prosecutorial misconduct. There's no levers in place to properly monitor that. And it looks like right now it's not being discussed. So where should they start?
Well, I think we start by acknowledging that true conservatives, real conservatives, William Buckley conservatives, Burke conservatives, genuine conservatives have a lot in common with genuine liberals. They both want small government. They want the government out of their bedrooms, out of their deathbeds, out of their places of worship. They want the government to mind its own business and to limit itself to John Stuart Mill's notion that the only thing that should ever be criminalized is if you are hurting other people. But it never is a proper function of government to try to make you do something that helps yourself and that makes you a better person. You know, that's for your pastor, your rabbi, your minister, your wife, your mother, your husband, but not the government. So I think we start by trying to seek common ground between genuine conservatives and genuine liberals. I got that common ground when I had debates over and over again with William Buckley, who was a genuine and thoughtful conservative. He called me his favorite liberal. I called him my favorite conservative. I think that we can meet common ground and be just as strongly opposed when the right and when the left try to oppress us in the name of big government. So we have a very hard job in front of us because most Americans want results. They don't care as much about process, but true conservatives and true liberals care deeply that the right process, the right procedures are followed. I think it was Felix Frankfurter who once said the history of liberty is largely a history of following proper procedures. And both the extremes on the right and the extremes on the left over the years, over the generations, over the centuries, have followed wrong procedures that's led us to extremes on both sides. So you can be a committed liberal, a committed conservative, and still share common ground and fight against a big oppressive government.
Amen to that. So let's talk about the pardons. People are upset, some on both sides. Some thought that the blanket pardon for the J6ers wasn't the way to go, that it should have been separated into groups, whether the nonviolent or the violent should have received the pardons. What are your thoughts? I feel, obviously, because I was personally affected, that pardons were necessary in this case as the forefathers had intended, to give the executive power the opportunity to pardon unjust verdicts. How do you feel about the way that the pardons came down?
Look, first, I agree that pardon is a very important part of our system of checks and balances. I had the privilege of advising President Trump in his last term on a few of the pardons. I remember him calling me on the phone. It's so interesting to get a call sometimes at 8 o'clock at night. Hey, Alan, it's Donald. You're tempted to say, Donald who? No, what can I do for you? And on a couple of occasions, he said, what do you know about Rod Blagojevich? Is he a good guy? What do you think about his pardon? And a few others like that. So I was privileged to be able to give the president my advice. He didn't always accept it, but at least he was open to hearing it. So I think the pardon power is a very, very important power. My preference would have been president to literally go through all the J6 cases and give pardons to everybody who was not involved, who were exercising their First Amendment rights, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. By the way, Justice Brandeis, one of the great liberals of all time, said that even the right of trespass can be important under the First Amendment, that trespassing on other people's property, although it might be a tort or maybe a minor infringement, if you have the right to protest, it also may mean you have the right, in some circumstances, to exercise that right by protesting, in this case, by entering the Congress. In your case, of course, we have videotapes of the police welcoming you in, so there was no trespass at all. What you did was perfectly lawful. But my preference would have been to first pardon the people who didn't hurt anybody, who didn't confront policemen, and then do a case-by-case analysis. If people hit back because they were hit, that would be one thing. But I would rather have seen a blanket pardon for everybody who engaged in nonviolent protests, and then case-by-case determinations of the others. But all things being equal, I think I prefer to see the blanket pardons over the blanket failure to pardon.
Yeah, so I read all 1,500 statement of facts for those that were prosecuted. And when I looked through a lot of those violent assault on a police officer cases, you saw some very strange things. Stuff like people making contact with the front of a police shield. You saw people that were getting beaten with batons that grabbed the baton that was beating them. And so what do you do when you're trying to communicate this to the public and you try to get them to understand that you can't just lump everyone in, and all 1,500 people live with this moniker that they were part of a violent protest, and many don't understand the incorrect actions of the police, as well as the fact that many people the doors were opened, and we can play that video. The doors were opened and the police allowed them in, and doors that were closed. So how do we communicate this to the public and break through this the ceiling of the narrative that has been set by the media?
It's very, very hard. I remember once the joke of a client saying, "Well, he hit my fist with his jaw." It's a matter of perception and perspective. And there were some people who were entitled to fight back against improper police conduct, and there were some who weren't, which is why I say a case-by-case analysis of people who were genuinely charged with really, really serious violence would have been the way to go. But if you're going to do a blanket on either way, the blanket pardon was better than a blanket non-pardon. And of course, we know that this follows a precedent established by the former President Biden when he pardoned and commuted sentences as well, some on a fairly blanket basis, as well as Obama. So there have been blanket pardons previously as well. Of course, famous ones included Carter pardoned everybody who had to go to Canada to avoid the draft. There were Lincoln's famous speech in his second inaugural with malice toward none and charity to all. So these are hard decisions, and it's hard. And what you've done a great job, and those who have collected the videotapes, by showing often a reluctant American public that sees things in black and white, that there are gray areas here. And even the people who were charged with violence, many of them were acting, at least in their view, in self-defense.
I wanted to ask you about the Supreme Court decision in the Fisher case, under which they said that 18 U.S.C. 1512 C2 was improperly applied. And this charge was, as you know, originally put into place in the fallout from the Arthur Anderson and Enron debacle, in which executives destroyed evidence to prevent congressional inquiry. And the Justice Department said that people that entered into the Capitol to protest by virtue of entering had somehow impacted evidence. And the Supreme Court said, unless you can show a direct contact between evidence and their actions, this cannot be applied. Did they get it right? And
Yeah.
if so, why did they get it right?
Well, they got it right because Thomas Jefferson said back in, I think, 1801, for a criminal statute to be legitimate, a reasonable person has to be able to understand it if he reads it while running. Can you imagine just the visual? Guy's holding a law book, he's running, and he's reading the statute, and he has to say to himself, oh, yeah, that statute really does cover this conduct. Now, I read the statute you're talking about while sitting. I studied it the way you did. There's no way to interpret that statute as applying to people who came and sat in the House of Representatives gallery. Nothing to do with evidence. That was such an absurd misapplication of the law that it doesn't take a brilliant lawyer to see that. And the Supreme Court saw through it in 1 second.
Yeah, and now I wanted to get down into some policy issues and discussing judicial reform and criminal justice reform. None of the J6 prosecutions allowed for a change of venue, and even Timothy McVeigh got a change of venue because everyone in the Oklahoma area was somehow affected by the bombing, and many were fact witnesses. We had judges that claimed on the stand that they had seen from their homes or the offices the activities of January 6th, and they themselves were then fact witnesses. And then we had an unusually difficult time in an area where 92% of the DC population voted for Biden. You and I know we did 3 mock trials, and out of, I think we polled over 120 jurors, and there was only one of all those jurors that stood up and said, this looks like that they were overcharged, and no one could get a change of venue. What's your thoughts on that, and what can be done about the fact that when the media levels an assault like they did on the defendants, that just precipitated and inundated the populace with negative attitudes towards the protesters? What can be done to prevent this from happening again? Because now the media is so prevalent, it's nonstop. So you have the judges, the prosecutors, the jury, and the media all prosecuting these people in a way that did not allow for a fair trial.
No, you're 100% right. And forum shopping has been a part of our legal system since the beginning of time, and it's wrong, and particularly wrong in a case like this. Look, I have friends. I lived in the District of Columbia. I have a lot of friends who live in the District of Columbia. They were all just frightened out of their wits on January 6th, particularly those who lived up around Capitol Hill. They were really, really afraid because the media was exaggerating everything, was painting it as an insurrection and a revolution and a revolt and a takeover of government and all of that. And policemen and people who are related to policemen. So, of course, there should have been a change of venue. The case should have been tried. It could have been tried in Virginia. It could have been tried in West Virginia. Could have been tried in any of 15 or 20 states that are a drive or a train or even a short plane ride away from the District of Columbia. The last place it should have been tried was the District of Columbia. Not only that, but the judges in the District of Columbia tend to be relatively one-sided. I know I was a law clerk in the District of Columbia. I clerked for the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals, and then I clerked for a Justice of the Supreme Court. And boy, I wouldn't have wanted to be tried in front of a jury of DC people. And it was remarkable to me that even one of the mock jurors was able to objectively look at the evidence. I think the vast majority of people in the District of Columbia, as you say, 92%, maybe even higher, voted. Certainly, I think less than 8% voted for Trump. But the numbers are staggering, and many of the jurors would start out with a very strong presumption of guilt from what they saw on television, what they read in the media. And so it was a terrible mistake. And I think it probably would have been reversed on appeal. Remember, there are a whole series of Supreme Court cases about changes of venue in criminal cases, more traditional cases, where a murder case or a rape case or something like that. But this is a case in which the government claimed it was an insurrection. And that is that we were all the victims of this. So, the idea that you try it in the Capitol, in the place where the crime, where there were victims, direct victims, is preposterous, and I think would have been reversed had the case gone all the way to the Supreme Court.
My favorite comment from all the mock jurors was, I feel like that I would have given them not guilty if they were not white. That's the kind of headwinds that we face there. So I wanted to talk about the grand jury system. So you encouraged us, and we made a motion in my case where you requested that the government show exculpatory evidence to the grand jury. And that was not allowed. And in the grand jury system, many people don't know this, that let's say that someone committed a murder and there's a video of another person actually shooting the victim. There is no responsibility, no statute that requires a prosecutor to show the exculpatory evidence to the grand jury. And this is something that we've got to address. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, no, you're absolutely right. The grand jury is a scandal. It should be abolished. It was intended to protect defendants. It's now the kindergarten plaything of the prosecution. They can do whatever they want. They can call whatever witnesses. They don't have to call any witnesses. They can use FBI agents who just relate what witnesses said to them. There's no cross-examination. There's no opportunity for a defense attorney to appear in front of the grand jury. And yet the American public seems to think that if a grand jury indicts, that somehow changes the presumption of innocence. It doesn't at all, because it's completely one-sided. My favorite story is about a case where a guy was charged with killing his wife, and his wife showed up, and the grand jury didn't even have to know that. Now, under Jenks and Brady and all of those cases and Giglio, the government has to turn it over to the defense, but it doesn't have to present it to the grand jury. And since the defense gets no opportunity to present to the grand jury in the federal system, in some states they do. New York, you can appear in front of the grand jury in a limited number of cases and try to present evidence. But in the federal system, the grand jury is just completely and totally one-sided and bears no relationship to justice. It's like the Star Chamber of English common law, and so nobody should take seriously a grand jury indictment. And too many people do. Oh, he was indicted by the grand jury. That must mean there's some evidence of guilt. Yeah, but it also may mean that there's evidence of innocence that the grand jury never saw.
Wanted to talk to you about the suppression of evidence in regards to the discovery process. You and I both know a defendant named William Pope that's Free State Will on X. He was a pro se defendant that did an amazing job at research. And because he was pro se, he got access to some files that were deemed highly sensitive. For what reason? There's no good reason for calling these. This is just like the overclassification problem we have in the intelligence agents. And so he's trying to get his PhD. He's trying to clear his name. He's received a pardon. His case was dismissed. And so he filed a motion to get some more discovery that he knows will help clear his name. And what the government, this is the current government, this is the current administration, this is not the Biden administration, but they are still not providing the information. They went one step further and they countered and said, we want to claw back, we want to pull back all the information that you have already that falls under this highly sensitive classification. But it's information that's pertinent to his case. He might have a civil case in the future, but this is happening now. This is not happening previous to Trump's inauguration. Why would they do that? And what do you say to the people in the DOJ that are doing this?
Well, first of all, we don't know who's doing it. Remember, most of the people in the DOJ are career people. They didn't switch on January, when President Trump came into office. Obviously, we have a new attorney general, deputy attorney general, assistant attorney general, and heads soon of each of the divisions. But line prosecutors are still going to be line prosecutors, the people who have been in office for many, many, many years. And so you don't expect dramatic changes. So I would not attribute this failure in the attempt to claw back evidence and the attempt to deny discovery is wrong. I wouldn't attribute that to this administration. I would attribute it to the transition. And we'll wait and see once the administration and the Justice Department is fully staffed and you can then call the right people and get access to the right people and make sure the motions get to the right people. I suspect we may see some different results. So I wouldn't give up on that. The deep state, I don't like the term, but obviously career people who have been in the office, lifers who have been in the office for 20, 30 years, many of them are my students. They don't change with administrations. They just continue to do business as usual. And denying discovery is doing business as usual, unfortunately.
I don't like the term deep state. I prefer the term the bureaucracy state, and I think it's time that we break the bureaus. I think that's all that's left to do. Many people we've even get some of this now on the other side of the fence. Many people want to see whether or not there was any entrapment type activity on the part of the government. So towards the end of the prosecutions, and we learned that there was at least 26 FBI agents undercover. And many people don't know this, but you and I know this because we saw the videos that Will provided us. There was undercover Capitol Police that were pushing people up the rafters. They were undercover, dressed like protesters, and they were encouraging people, saying, go, 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 directing them towards the Capitol. We've had a lot of this type activity. We saw it in the Governor Whitmer kidnapping hoax, where a couple defendants were found not guilty because the jury thought that they were entrapped. And this goes all the way back to the DeLorean case. What is your thoughts on the activity of the police from what you saw and the activity of the government, and whether or not there's a claim there on behalf of the defendants?
Well, I was one of DeLorean's lawyers, so I go back a long time. I had my first entrapment defense case back in the 1960s. That's how far back I go. Entrapment has been a common tool used by the government in many, many cases, drug cases, etc. I'm involved in a case right now where there are issues of entrapment. I can't discuss them because it's a pending case. But entrapment is a very common tactic, and the law of entrapment favors the prosecution. It basically says you can do anything. You can entrap anybody. You can fool them into it. You can lie to them. You can do anything as long as they had a, quote, predisposition to commit the crime anyway. So a defendant who had a so-called predisposition to commit the crime can't benefit from the defense of entrapment. And the government generally uses it against people who they think had a predisposition. It's pretty easy to prove predisposition for many, many defendants. So the entrapment defense is very, very rarely used successfully. I've had it used successfully in a couple of cases, but it's very, very rare.
Well, there's another case that's in the news a lot, that there was the Tiger King case where Joseph Passage Maldonado was prosecuted for hiring a hitman to kill a woman named Carol Baskin. But a lot of people are upset because it looks like that the FBI informant in that case spent 8 months encouraging the defendant to commit the crime. He declined for 8 months. And then when he finally agreed to do it, there's some dispute over what he was giving the informant the money for. But that evidence, some of it has been suppressed. And what are your thoughts on a client that's had an FBI agent encouraging him to commit a crime for 8 months?
Well, let me tell you what happens, because I've had this case over and over and over again. The government sends in the person to entrap. The person has a wire, has a recording device, but he doesn't turn it on. He doesn't turn it on while he's entrapping him. He waits until he's entrapped, and only then does he turn it on to prove the actual crime. So the defense has a hard time proving what led up to the commission of the crime. leading, generally they erase or they don't record the part of it in which the FBI informant or the undercover agent or the flipped witness pleads with the defendant to do the crime. So there's a lot of destruction of evidence there, and it's a very, very difficult issue. Look, entrapment can be a very valuable tool of prosecution. If you have somebody who wants to kill the president and wants to kill somebody else, and you can get him to act it out in a way that allows the government to trap him before he does it, that can be valuable. But I think entrapment is overused, and it's used in political cases, it's used in drug cases and money cases, and it's way overused, and it's very difficult for a defendant to succeed on an entrapment defense. We don't want to live in a society where crimes are committed because the government commits the crimes. It was John Donne who said in his poem, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we to deceive." And once the government is in the business of deception, all bets are off, and they do a lot. They cover up their own deception. I've been involved in many, many such cases. I've written about such cases in my book, The Best Defense, and other books. So unfortunately, I'm an expert in government deception.
I want to talk to you about another cover-up, and you and I did a previous a podcast where you were discussing the Epstein situation, and
right.
You have been completely transparent on this, and I want you to know I got so many messages saying that he's so believable. I believe him, and I don't really think the public understands how transparent you've been on this. And I wanted to ask you, since the FBI is facing some serious legitimacy problems right now, and the public is demanding that these files come out, do you think that they will come out? And if they do, what should we expect?
They won't come out, and they're being deliberately withheld. I am the only person who's calling for complete and total disclosure of every piece of evidence relevant to Jeffrey Epstein. Why? It's easy. I have nothing to hide. I haven't touched a woman other than my wife since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, this woman who accused me. I never met her, never heard of her, never knew who she was. And we were able to prove conclusively that I couldn't have been in the places where I was alleged to have been when this all happened. So it was very easy for me to be transparent. But the government is now withholding evidence. Let me tell you what they're withholding. They're withholding evidence that shows that many of the women who made accusations made them falsely. They're protecting the women, what they're saying, and they're saying it openly. We're not going to disclose any information critical of the, quote, victims. But who are the victims? In my case, I was the victim. I was the victim of a false accusation. And so they're not protecting the victims. They're protecting accusers who may be victims or may be victimizers. And so we're never going to see that information disclosed. How do I know? Because I have that information. I know what's there, but they won't release it. They won't release information that raises questions about the credibility of people who claim to be victims. There's also information about other people. I know their names. I'm not permitted to disclose them who have been accused. Some of their names have been disclosed. The former Majority Leader of the United States Senate, George Mitchell, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, they were accused of having unprotected sex. Is there any evidence of that? No. But just on the basis of accusations, it tends to be believed. You say people now believe me because I'm credible. Why shouldn't they believe me? I've done absolutely nothing wrong, and not a single piece of evidence has ever been produced to show I did anything wrong. And yet people say, well, he's been accused. Who knows? Maybe it's a gray area. No, it isn't a gray area. It's black and white, false accusation, total innocence. And of course I want everything revealed, because if everything is released, it will prove my innocence beyond any doubt. I want every videotape, every audio tape, every document, every redacted FBI file, everything to be released, but it's not going to be.
So you believe that they're protecting the accusers. Now, on the sides of the accused, do you feel like that there are people that are being granted protections that other people accused of these type of crimes are not?
Yes, I know of such cases. I know of at least several cases where people have been accused and named, and the courts have covered it up.
Did,
So
did
it's
you
very
find? Did you find in a, I don't know if you can tell me this, but did you find that obtaining the non-prosecution agreement in Florida was unusually easy, or that the prosecutor was overly willing to cooperate?
Oh, it was very, very hard. We faced very, very aggressive prosecutors, but we were able to prove beyond any doubt that Epstein never traveled in interstate commerce for purposes of having sex with an underage person. And that was a requirement. That's why the government felt they had to accept a plea bargain where he pleaded guilty to state charges that don't require travel in interstate commerce. So it was a very tough negotiation. It took months and months and months, and we got the best deal we could. The government thought they got the best deal they could, but it's been called a sweetheart deal. It was not a sweetheart deal. It was based on lack of evidence of some of the elements of the crimes.
So the DOJ is saying that the files that they will release, I think there's supposed to be a dump on April 1st, but they're saying that some of it is going to be redacted for reasons of national security.
That's not. There's no national security. Let me tell you, Jeffrey Epstein had nothing to do with national security. He was not a spy for the Mossad. I think he was in Israel once in his life, came to visit for one day. I think he flew out the same day he flew in. There's just no truth to any of this. He was not an asset, no national security involved. He was, a guy who was a hedonist and did some awful things to some people. But there's no national security. Everything should be revealed. Everything should be released. No redactions, period. I waive all of my rights of privacy. Anything that I said, anything I did, any photograph, feel free, show it, do it. It'll prove what I've been saying all along.
Well, why do you think that he was killed in prison?
There's no question that he didn't just commit suicide. He may have had help committing suicide. I've had my doubts about that. He was supposed to have a bail hearing a couple of days after he died. And he had a good shot at getting bail under the circumstances of the case. And the idea that he would kill himself 2 or 3 days before he might have been freed on bail always struck me as strange. On the other hand, I don't know who would be motivated to kill him. Maybe he had some secrets that I was not aware of. I was his lawyer, so I think I knew most of his secrets. I remember asking him, do you have anything to worry about a particular person? He said, no, I have nothing to worry about him. I have so much on him that I have nothing to worry about.
So you don't feel that your life was ever, you don't feel like your life was ever in danger due to your possible knowledge of people who were on the list?
No, I publicly stated everything. Everything that I knew about the case, I wrote about. I didn't keep any secrets. I wrote a book called Guilt by Accusation, in which I named names. The only names I couldn't name were ones that were sealed, and I know some of those, but most of them are not particularly high profile or powerful people. There were other accusers too. There's a woman named Sarah Ransom who accused Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton of having sex with underage girls. Also accused the guy who's the head of Virgin Airlines. Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter was accused. It's so easy to make an accusation. And all of these people were accused. And the woman, Sarah Ransom, for example, who accused all these people, later admitted she made the whole thing up. She told New Yorker magazine, I made it all up. I wanted to have something over Epstein. But that hasn't come out. That's still being suppressed. The whole history of Sarah Ransom is being suppressed.
Why is this all being suppressed?
Because she alleges that she's a victim. She was like 20 years old.
I mean, generally, not just with respect to a single accuser. Or why do you think it's being suppressed in the general sense? Because
if you claim to be a victim, the courts are going to protect you. They're going to presume you innocent and the person you accuse guilty. That's what the legacy of the Me Too movement has been. Mm-hmm. And that's what I titled my book, Guilt by Accusation. If you've been accused, you're guilty. And I have facts. I know facts that would prove conclusively that some of the accusers are guilty of perjury and should be prosecuted and should be imprisoned. And yet the government is protecting them because they don't want to be perceived as in any way damaging people who claim to have been victims, even if they aren't victims at all, even if they're victimizers.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you real quick about Julian Assange. So you stated once, if the U.S. thinks they can lock up Assange for spilling secrets, they'd better build a prison big enough for every journalist who's ever peeked at a government memo, starting with me. So he's moved on in life, but the question remains, should Trump pardon him?
Yes, I think he should. I think that Assange is the New York Times. He's not the one who stole the secrets. The people who stole the secrets are guilty of crimes, Chelsea Manning and some of the others. But Assange is the New York Times, the Washington Post, simply reporting on the fact that there were stolen secrets. And so, yes, I think he should be pardoned. And I don't think that what he's done is wrong under the First Amendment.
Okay, let's get into Israel. In the 1980s, there was a time when American sentiment turned against Israel for a while, and then it seemed like in most of my life that there was much better sentiment in the country towards Israel. But it looks like that the propaganda war is one where it's not the kinetic war they're losing. It's that the propaganda war is just a constant onslaught. And there's lots of reasons for that. But I wanted to ask, how can Israel be more effective? Every government, you and I are both critical of government. And I think that's an important part of the system, is people should always be critical of their government and suspicious of power, whether it's America or Israel. But a lot of the sentiment is turning against the Jewish people, wherever they are. What do you think should be done on the propaganda side, or just on the media influence side, to change that?
Well, it's very hard. Well, I'm 86 years old, so I can't pick up a gun and go and fight and defend the Jewish people in Gaza from what happened on October 7th, rapes and murders and beheadings and all of that. All I can do is write books. And so my most recent small book is called The 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies and How to Refute Them with Truth. I printed, at no profit to me, 1 million copies of this. It's small enough to fit in your pocket. And we're distributing them to 1 million students on college campuses around the country, Columbia and Harvard and all over. And we've already distributed 600,000 copies on approximately 1,000 campuses. And so I take on the lies and I try to answer them in the marketplace of ideas. I believe in the First Amendment. I don't think people should be shut down. They should be answered. This thug who is being deported, who was the leader of the pro-Hamas demonstrations at Columbia, he had a right to hold up a sign accusing Israel of whatever and calling for genocide if he did against the Jewish people. He has a First Amendment right to do that, and I have a First Amendment right to answer him, and I'm going to answer him, and I'm going to continue to answer him. And I have another book coming out soon called Palestinianism, which focuses on why everybody is so immersed in the Palestinian issue and focused on Israel's faults, when look what's going on in Syria today. Hundreds of thousands of people are subject to possible murder and etc. What's happening in Darfur. The world doesn't care. It only cares if the alleged enemies are Jews, and it's part of a long history of anti-Semitism. Israel is the Jew among nations, and so they are now subjected to the kind of anti-Semitism that individual Jews were subjected to before there was a Jewish state. But for me, all I want to take this in the marketplace of ideas. Let's have all sides presented. I've offered to debate this at Harvard. They've rejected the offer. Harvard today wouldn't accept the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They would say, there were too many people who'd be offended by that. So we live in a world where there's debate and dialogue, and there's just propaganda, and that's not America.
I just finished reading War Against the Jews, and it's a great piece, and I've come to the conclusion that, and people need to focus on this, there's not going to be peace as long as Hamas is in leadership. And we can't discuss any progress till we get to a post-Hamas Palestinian leadership. In your book, You pull
Second
out.
World War. The Second World War, you couldn't have peace with Germany until you destroyed the Nazi Party. And once the Nazis were destroyed, then you could have the Marshall Plan. You could have peace, and there was peace in Central Europe until Ukraine for 70 years. But you can't have peace in the Middle East with Hamas still in control of Gaza.
I wanted to read a little excerpt out of your book. And using the most vulnerable civilians in this way as human shields is a Hamas tactic that goes back many years. As one of its leaders boasted in 2008, for the Palestinian people, death has become an industry. The elderly excel at this, and so do the children. This is why they have formed human shields of the women and children. So many people, I don't think they're just aware of how that Hamas leadership profits from the death of these individuals. And this is the plan. The plan is to allow as many people to die because we win on the propaganda front. And in that, as that occurs, Hamas themselves, the leadership, gets enriched. What are your thoughts on Hamas leadership and what has to be done to get new leadership for the Palestinian people?
Well, look, Sinwar, the guy who was the head of Hamas, who was fortunately killed by Israel, said he wanted more martyrs. He wanted more children, more Palestinian women and children to die, because every time a Palestinian woman and child dies as a result of being used as a human shield, that helps Hamas and it hurts Israel. So it's very important that we also know that these people at Columbia and Barnard who are protesting on behalf of Hamas. They believe that what they call Al-Aqsa Storm, which was October 7th, the rapes, the murders, the beheadings, were all justified. And these people are justifying the murder and rapes of innocent people. And then they're condemning Israel for fighting back and doing what the United States did in self-defense when we were bombed in Pearl Harbor. Yeah, we did bomb Tokyo, and we did bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we did bomb Berlin, and we did kill Hitler and Goering and Goebbels and all of those people, and ended Nazism. People say you can't end an ideology. Of course you can. When the United States, Churchill and Roosevelt destroyed Nazism, that was the end of that ideology. There's still a few Nazis hanging around, places, but there's no such thing as Nazism anymore in the world, or what was ruling Japan. It's the same. You can destroy an ideology if you destroy the leaders of the ideology. That's why Israel has to be given the green light to destroy Hamas completely.
And to that point, Alan,
with decent Palestinian people.
It's important to focus on just at the most basic level of what's happening in Palestine. So when you look at what's called Palestinian education, it's not education. It is a farm league for terrorists. They're just teaching we have this generational issue now that they are taught terror from the moment that they can get into school. And how is it that we can change that? I mean, is there something the international community can do? Because the problem is that we see all these terrible things happen to the Palestinian people, which I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for. But as you say in your book, the biggest enemy to the Palestinian people is Hamas. And this starts all the way at education. If you would just give us a few minutes on what's the plan forward and what can be done to stop this indoctrination?
Well, the indoctrination comes not only from Hamas, it comes from the United Nations. The United Nations Refugee and Relief Fund promotes a lot of this miseducation. The Palestinian Authority promotes miseducation. We have statutes on the books that prohibit payment of money to any group that promotes this kind of anti-Semitism. And I think President Trump is going to enforce those statutes in ways that they weren't enforced previously. So I think you're absolutely right. It starts with education. But let's remember, too, the Germans and the Japanese during World War II were educated to hate Americans. And once their leaders were defeated and executed and Nazism ended, the education stopped and you were able to re-educate quite quickly. And I think we could do that to decent people of Palestine, decent Palestinian people who really want to live in peace with Israel. So, I'm an optimist. I just think that we can turn this around, but it's going to take hard work. And that's why at 86 years old, I'm still working and writing and trying to present a different point of view from the narrative that Hamas presents,
Well,
and that is places like Colombia.
Let's bring it home, and we can end on this. So Colombia recently lost $400 million in federal funding for allowing Jewish students to be harassed. And so we have a similar problem here. What's your thought on how we can, should this continue? Should we start depriving universities of the federal funds that are encouraging this type of behavior, which is an impairment of the civil rights of the students?
Well, that's the hard question. The hard question is this: how do you selectively cut off funding that's being used to propagandize students and promote hatred of America and hatred of Israel, without also cutting off funding for medical research and scientific research and other research? So what we have to do is figure out ways of targeting the financial penalties toward the groups that could be deterred without cutting back on the importance of the kind of research that's being done. I think we can do it, and you have to start somewhere, and starting with the cutting back of the money from Colombia sent a message. It was a shot across the bow, and I think some schools now should be given a chance to reform and do a better job, and the government should then do a better job also of focusing specifically on where the problems are. For example, Barnard College has a women's studies department, which is completely sexist, racist, anti-Semitic, and they say right in their website that their goal is to end the patriarchy. Nothing to do about teaching students. And so, if you start with places like Barnard College and other ideological places, I think that will target the violators more specifically than broad deprivations of funding that could affect medical and scientific research.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure. These conversations are always illuminating. Look forward to talking to you again.
It was an honor to be your lawyer. I consider myself, in addition to being your lawyer, your friend. And so let's continue the friendship, but let you never again need me to be your lawyer.
Amen to that, man. Thank you. Take care.